There's a small moment that usually doesn't register as anything important. You call your dog's name. Not loudly, not urgently, just the normal way you always do. And this time, they don't look up. They don't move. They don't react. They're not asleep. Their eyes are open. Nothing dramatic happens after that. You don't think about it again. But the moment still sits there, slightly unfinished. Not because something is wrong, just because it's different from what usually happens. That tiny difference is enough to linger for a second longer than expected. There are a lot of moments like that, when your dog chooses the other side of the room instead of sitting near you, when they stay lying down while you walk around, when they don't follow you from room to room anymore, when they pause before coming over, like they're deciding something, when they seem comfortable not checking where you are, when they stay quiet even though you're nearby, when they don't react immediately to your voice, when they don't seem to need reassurance in the way they used to. None of these moments are loud. They don't demand attention. They don't come with obvious signals. They just happen. And because they happen quietly, they're easy to interpret without realizing you're interpreting them at all. A common assumption slips in during those quiet moments. That distance means loss of interest. That silence means emotional withdrawal. That calm means detachment. That not following means not needing. That independence means coldness. It's not an extreme thought. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels reasonable enough to go unnoticed. Most people don't consciously think, "My dog doesn't care." It's subtler than that. It sounds more like, "They don't really need me right now," or "They're kind of doing their own thing now," or "They've changed." That assumption isn't entirely wrong, but it's also not complete. And because it feels almost correct, it tends to stay unexamined. If you slow those moments down, they don't all look the same. There's the kind of distance where your dog settles a few feet away, still facing you. Not close, not far. They can see you without adjusting their body. They don't drift off. They just stay there, aware. There's another kind where they move to a different room, but not fully. They stop at the doorway. Or they choose a spot where they can hear everything you're doing. They don't check in with their eyes. They don't need to. There's the version where they stay put when you stand up. They watch you leave the couch. They don't follow, they don't rush. Their body doesn't tense. They don't look concerned. And then there's the quieter version, where nothing changes in behavior at all, except the absence of something that used to happen automatically. The following, the checking, the constant positioning near you. Each of these looks like distance, but they don't feel the same when you sit with them long enough. Some feel settled. Some feel neutral. Some feel intentional. Some feel almost invisible until you notice them later. They all get labeled the same way, even though they're not experienced the same way. The same behavior also shifts depending on when it happens. Distance in the morning feels different than distance at night. When your dog stays on their bed while the house wakes up, it doesn't land the same as when they stay there while you're winding down. Distance after play feels different than distance without it. After movement, after interaction, space can feel like an exhale. Without that context, it can feel unanswered. There's distance that shows up only when guests are around. Distance that appears when the house is quiet. Distance that only happens when routines change. Distance that disappears the moment something unfamiliar happens. There's also distance that comes and goes. Some days they follow you everywhere. Other days, they don't. Nothing else changes. Same food, same walks, same voice. And then there's distance that shows up gradually, not all at once, not enough to point at, just enough that you notice it in hindsight. None of these versions announce themselves. They don't say what they are. They just exist in slightly different arrangements of the same behavior. And because the behavior looks similar on the surface, it's easy to assume the reason underneath is the same. There's another way to notice those moments without turning them into signals. Sometimes your dog doesn't move closer because they don't need to change anything. They're already comfortable where they are. They're not deciding. They're not holding back. They're just staying. They don't shift their body. They don't check your position. They don't adjust when you move. Nothing is being communicated outward. Nothing is being withheld. From the outside, it still looks like distance. From inside the moment, nothing is happening at all. No approach, no retreat, just no movement. And when nothing moves, it's easy to assume something has stopped, even when it hasn't. Small differences are easiest to miss when everything feels normal. A quiet dog looks the same most of the time. Lying down is lying down. Not following is just not following. Because nothing escalates, the brain uses shortcuts. It connects today's silence to yesterday's. It groups this distance with other distances. It names the pattern quickly so it doesn't have to keep watching. Not because something feels wrong, because nothing feels urgent. So subtle variations get smoothed out. Different moments start sharing the same label. And once that label exists, each new quiet moment slips into it automatically without being checked on its own. Not out of carelessness, out of habit, because quiet moments rarely ask to be separated. That's usually when certain thoughts begin to show up. Not as full sentences, more like background checks. You're okay, right? They're fine. They don't really need anything. Sometimes it goes the other way, a mild unease, a brief sense of being less central than before. It doesn't turn into worry. It doesn't turn into sadness. It just hovers long enough to be noticed. Some people mention it casually. Others don't mention it at all. They just watch a little more closely afterward. The interesting part is that the behavior itself often doesn't escalate. The distance doesn't increase. The silence doesn't deepen. What changes is how often it gets mentally replayed. The same moment viewed again from a slightly different emotional angle. Not to solve it, not to fix it, just to quietly check where it fits. And that checking doesn't come from panic. It comes from wanting to be sure nothing important was missed. There's one version of distance that doesn't fully match any of the others. It doesn't look intentional. It doesn't look relaxed. It doesn't look avoidant either. Your dog is in the room, close enough, but their attention feels oddly unassigned, not focused on you, not focused on anything else, just not anchored. They respond if you call, they move if you stand. Nothing is wrong, but the space around them feels different, less about rest, less about choice. It's subtle enough to dismiss, easy to confuse with calm, easy to overlook entirely, and it doesn't stay consistent. It shows up on certain days, disappears on others, leaves no clear pattern behind. That version doesn't fit cleanly into ideas like independence or comfort. It doesn't ask for reassurance. It doesn't reject it either. It just exists as another quiet arrangement of distance, one that doesn't explain itself and doesn't stay long enough to be defined.